Hi everyone. Yes, sir. Welcome to my talk about how we successfully run a fully remote and autonomous team. I'm Andreas Nel. I've been a software engineer for just about 5 years now. I started working out at a small startup that specialized in developing medical practice management software. And then last year in March of 2021, I moved over to Entelect Software, which is a software consultancy which specializes in building custom software focused on corporate clients. I'd just like to preface this talk by saying that this is about what worked for me and my team, so you are very welcome to agree and or disagree with me. I'll be here all day. I'll also be in the Slack channel for our viewers there at home, and I'll also do a Q&A at the end of my session, and I'll also try to answer questions from Slack. If I don't get to them, I'll go get to them throughout the day. Cool, let's jump in. So I joined a brand spanking new team on a brand spanking new project. When we started, it consists out of a React frontend, a Node.js backend, and a mobile applications written with React Native. So we're a very JavaScript heavy team. Our team members all actually also, except one, started within a month of each other at Entelect. So this was a brand new experience for all of us. We have Tukunda, which is our senior software engineer. You can guess which one on my little diagram that is. We have a junior software engineer called Victor. We have Martin, who's a quality assurance engineer. He's the one with the beard. Thashin is our business analyst. And then me, Zane, and Joshua are all intermediate software engineers. We've been working fully remote since our inception in 2021. We are located all across the country, and we've actually quite wholeheartedly embraced the whole flexibility that remote work offers us. Madsen's located in Centurion. He actually starts out very early so that he can leave at 3 in the afternoon. Victor is a person who lives in Klerksdorp for whatever reason. Zane is based in Johannesburg, but he regularly takes working holidays to Cape Town. Thashin is constantly switching between his apartment in Johannesburg and his parents' place in Durban. Joshua's in Belito, and he's actually a surfer, so his working hours differ based on how the waves look. And Tukunda is in his house in Harare in Zimbabwe, or his place in Johannesburg, and I stay in Pretoria, because I'm boring like that. So originally we were solely responsible just for the React Native mobile applications, and another contractor, which was based in the UK and the USA, was responsible for the development and the maintenance of the web application and the back end of the project. They were only contracted for the first year of the project, however, so in December of 2021, we took over everything without increasing our team members or anything of those nature. Then there's one more person, that's Eni. He's supposed to be our manager. He signs contracts, he approves leave, he conducts performance reviews, and he pays for our team lunches. Thank you, Eni, wherever you are. He did, however, do something very interesting when our team was formed. He decided that we'd be his little experiment, so to speak, and being new, we didn't even know this. Our team was not assigned a team lead. He decided not to be involved in our day-to-day operations, so he would take much more of a spectator type of role. He did not prescribe a process we needed to follow when working on the project, and he gave us a short list of very clear expectations. First of all, he automatically approves all leave requests because he told us he assumes we've spoken to our team and the client when we make our leave requests, so he's just going to approve it. Then we were expected to handle any conflict we had between each other or with other people, first within the team before escalating it towards him. And then we were also trusted to practice our crafts with dedication and an attention to quality. So he is not going to be constantly checking up on us, which fits me perfectly. He essentially gave us full control over our entire working day, our tools, our processes, how we speak to the client, and whenever we do whatever. So long as we ensure that the product that we delivered was consistently delivered with an acceptable level of quality. And this is what I mean with an autonomous team. You know, it's a team that's responsible for themselves, a team that holds each other accountable, and a team that can work together and deliver without constant interference by management or leadership. So we as a team have seen each other in person about 7 times in the course of the year that we've been working together. And we quickly realized that we needed a better way to stay in touch than our once-a-day stand-up and some messages in the Slack channel. So we started doing 2 catch-up meetings every single day. That's Monday to Friday, every day, 2 meetings. One in the morning at 9 o'clock, and one in the afternoon at 3 o'clock. These meetings have a much more informal tone, so there's no fixed agenda, and we're free to talk about whatever is on our minds at the time. This can be where we talk about our weekend plans, which is usually the theme of our Monday morning and Friday afternoon catch-ups. We can talk about current affairs, organize our team socials, and vent about this one specific bug or this one specific person in the client meeting that has been bugging us for ages. These eventually evolved into sessions where we could quickly catch our teammates up on any new development changes or refactors, where we could get opinions on features that we were working on, and it also turned into sessions where we can do prioritizations and discussions about milestones, and where teammates were free to ask for help if needed. And these 2 sessions were probably the most important contributors to our team's success. They provided a platform where we could ask for help, where we could brainstorm. Teammates are provided the opportunity to just talk to each other and get to know one another, and they're often used as good starting points for face-to-face code reviews or pair programming sessions via video call. The other big process that is crucial to our success is how we do our development and our code review. We initially started out with sprints, where you would have a dedicated plan for 2 weeks and we just stick to those plans, but we quickly realized that things happen in life. The client would like to come back and say, this is the biggest priority now, we're going to miss a thing. Or production issues happen, and then you just constantly miss the sprint. So we decided to keep the cadence of 2 weekly meetings, but instead of allocating jobs beforehand, we have a backlog and we pick them up as team members become available. We do have a calculator, which takes into account how many story points we tend to complete per dev per day, and we use this calculator to give estimates on what would be done when the client asks for it. Then we implement a rule of 45 minutes, where each and every developer and our QA and our business analyst are free to call anyone in the team as soon as they've been stuck on a problem without making any progress for about 45 minutes or an hour. Then we strongly encourage small and coherent pull requests instead of monolithic ones. And my fellow code reviewers would appreciate how much we enjoy a 50-line pull request over a 50,000-line pull request. We actually ended up flagging unnecessarily large pull requests to be split up into bite-sized pull requests before we even start the review. Then all developers are actually responsible for the reviewing these pull requests. It's part of our day-to-day job, and getting them merged and deployed is our #1 priority, because your work is not done until the code that you have written is actually facing the client. I was in a team previously where developers were under the impression where their jobs were done as soon as the code was written and the pull request was opened. But this ended up in multiple stale pull requests, clogging the repo and not actually delivering a solution to the customer. And then, as I mentioned, closing them is everyone's first priority, and our QA is actually instrumental in making sure that our pull requests don't stay open for longer than 2 or 3 days before actually having to be resolved via an in-person, face-to-face code review. So this has not just had a significant impact on our code quality, but actually also our knowledge is shared in our team. We ensured that our BA and QA are also part of this whole code review process from the very beginning. We taught them Git, so they can switch between branches and they can build the project, learning how to, all the little headaches we get when we build a project. We can show them features even when they're like half done, and they can now start reading code. And it's amazing having a QA or BA being able to go through a branch and also point to the file or the line of code where they think the problem is happening. And these people are then also the final approvers of our pull requests instead of our developers. I am not moving slides. Yes, I have very basic slides. I have lots of notes. Okay, and so they ensure that the code that gets merged works on different machines and satisfies the requirements of the project. Okay. With regards to meetings, they're open to everyone, with attendance being optional as far as possible. So we found that people who attend meetings are usually people who actually want to be there instead of people who feel like they have to be there. And we found that these volunteers tend to be more invested and contribute better to meetings than people who are just forced to sit in these meetings. And they feel like they're actually involved in the important discussions. We opted for a video-first approach as far as possible, And in our team's experience, this has been crucial for ensuring we effectively communicate because we can pick up on body language and verbal cues, which you don't pick up on when you're staring at a bunch of letters and listening to these awkward pauses that people are having. And most of our team members also found that we feel less isolated from the world if it feels like you're actually talking to people that are staring to you, instead of a bunch of letters and you don't even know if the person is actually listening to you. However, there are some challenges that we need to point out, and that's that your internet connection is probably the biggest factor in how successful this is going to work, which is obvious. People actually also become much more self-conscious of how they look and how still they sit if they can see themselves. I have a team member who is bald, and he sat so still one time we thought he had a virtual background or he froze just because of the white wall. And it was just because of him being very nervous. And then it is also not feasible to do this if you are the type of person who want to do walking meetings where you actually go for a walk around the block while in a meeting, or you pick up your kids from school. And we're perfectly okay with that. We try to go with the thing of do what works for you and not what everyone else wants you to do. Right, and then the biggest part of our meetings is that we found that Zoom fatigue is really a thing. It's like everybody went meeting crazy as soon as the whole plague happened. We implemented a thing called the No Meeting Wednesday, so there's no meetings except for our catch-ups because no one messes with our catch-ups. And we batch our meetings at the beginning or the end of the week if we see that there's a number of scheduled meetings. Because we found that having meetings spread out over 3 days with just half an hour gaps between them was actually leading to a loss of productivity because there's not enough time between meetings to get into the development flow. So we've been working 100% remotely since the very beginning of our project, and we found that in order for this to work well for you, there are some things that you really need to take note of, because there's people who do the remote thing, but they don't feel like they're actually having a successful time. So we found that your choice of tools and programs that you use in your day-to-day life probably has a bigger impact on your productivity remotely than it does in person in the office. You know, you're fine with Slack messages disappearing in the office because you can just talk to people, but it's unacceptable at home because that's all you have. And then communication is crucial. Since people are not in the same room, you don't pick up on things by overhearing them. So people have to make a conscious decision to share information with the rest of the team. And if you have a team member who is not willing to share information, who does not actively make that decision, it's very easy for them to become key man dependencies and knowledge silos. You can also actually easily feel isolated from your company and from your team. And it's therefore extremely important that you have this mechanism, that you have that mechanism in place just for chatting with each other. It can be something like our two daily catch-ups, or another team that we know of has a Discord server where each team member has a voice channel dedicated to them. And then if anyone wants to talk to them, they can just pop in and have a little chat, similar to how you would stop at someone's desk. We also found that our in-person social events, like team lunches, are still crucial. You shouldn't, just because you work remote, do away with all in-person events, because these things help to improve your team morale, and it adds some spice to your life. We found that because we actually don't see each other every minute of every day, we don't tire of each other's ugly faces that much. So when we go to team lunches or when we organize like a team building or an in-person event, we're much more flexible about having it further away than that it usually would have been, or doing it after hours every once in a while. So working remotely is a big factor in how our team works, but I do believe that our autonomous team structure has had the biggest impact so far. We noticed that our teammates tended to naturally assume different roles that were necessary, and these roles were not usually linked to job title, actually. We found that people tended to veer towards their strengths and towards their expertise. For example, our head code reviewer is not our senior developer, because he's actually not the person with the most JavaScript-heavy experience in the team, but he can do very good architecture stuff. Our QA also has a Scrum certification, so he tries to fulfill that role. And our BA is actively part of our debugging sessions, because he brings that extra perspective to flow of stuff and, you know, the user flows. So our setup also allows us to directly work with the client instead of having a team lead that sits between us and the client and being the single point of contact. This reduces it reduces things being lost in translation, and because the client directly interfaces with us, And we've found that we could build trust with the team and that every person can act as a spokesperson for the rest of the team. We've become very invested in the project, and another process that enhances this is our demos every second week. We ask for a volunteer and a backup volunteer, just because of internet connections. And this voluntary process has the similar effect as meetings, where the volunteer is much more invested, much more knowledgeable, and can interact better with the client. And then in addition to this, we found that the lack of a fixed authority figure in our day-to-day meetings has resulted in much more involved contribution by our team members who would usually have stayed quiet if there was someone with a higher authority in that meeting. Our debates tend to be much more heated and tend to drag on for much longer, but teammates have this space where they can voice their frustrations and voice what they are thinking without feeling like their salary is going to be impacted. And we found that just by being heard usually helps people to just solve their issues instead of just finding a solution. And however, as I've mentioned, there's this danger of things becoming dragged out longer than usual. So team members need to be much more aware of when these things happen and have the ability to put a stop to any conversation and pitch to the team that they can postpone such discussions. And just like the remote work poses its challenges, so does this autonomous team setup. So first of all, it can be very jarring to do this. If you did not start out as a team with a setup, or you have a team lead that loves making rigid decisions, or you're just not used to this, or your personality requires someone above you telling you what to do, which is perfectly acceptable, it can be very difficult to do this. And if you handle this process incorrectly, you can have disastrous consequences, just for both for your team morale and for your productivity. So I would suggest if you do this, you make small and slow changes, like our keynote speaker said this morning. Next, the setup can be very dependent on the type of people who make up your team. People who are naturally self-disciplined and independent tend to work better. We also found that people who are a bit more experienced tend to fit this model much easier, because you can't just throw a bunch of graduates together and expect them to deliver a quality project. So what we found is that that it works if you have a team that's a majority more senior members, and then if you want your junior members to join, you rotate them in and out, so that they still have access to those mentor figures, and this type of working can rub off on them. Then lastly, the most difficult challenge that we had, and that we still have, is having the very difficult conversations with each other. You know, when you notice that someone is behaving toxic towards someone else, or unprofessional, or when this one team member has been saying that something's been done, but it's been done for like a month now, and it's still not merged. You know, it's difficult to challenge someone who's down there in the trenches with you, instead of just throwing it over the wall to your team lead who can just handle it for you. So your conflict resolution skills really needs to have an upgrade if you want to do this type of setup. So how do you do this in your team? Maybe you're already working remotely, but you constantly feel like you're out of the loop. Or you might be in a position to restructure your team. Or maybe you feel like your team is trading on eggshells when they're around you and they don't want to speak to you. So here's some pointers that we found might work. So first of all, with your team setup, you need a diverse and well-resourced team. Your team members should be catered towards solving a specific need in your project instead of just being in the team because they are there. Then we found that your multidisciplinary teams tend to work in this autonomous model much better because they bring different skills to the team and they can handle everything that a team requires. We do peer reviews for judging performance because your squad always knows you better than your manager no matter where you are. And we found that what gets measured is what gets prioritized. So metrics that you use have to be very much geared towards actively achieving your goals instead of being a metric just for enforcing a process. Then we suggest that you give the team the responsibility of managing their day-to-day, since they are lazy and they will optimize towards working their jobs as easy as possible. And you have to be careful that your team doesn't consist of a bunch of people that have the same personality type or the same way of thinking, because this can easily result in an echo chamber where nothing really gets done and where people's different perspectives and skill sets don't get involved in this project and your goals. You need to ensure that you have a mechanism for teammates to be able to just talk. They need to feel comfortable, they need to feel psychologically safe, and they feel like people are actually listening to them, like our daily catch-ups. Next, you need to set very clear expectations, both of what you expect of your team and what your team expects of you. They should at all times be aware of what they want from each other, what their goals are, and how they work together. What we did, for instance, is we created a team charter, which is a document where you outline these types of things, and you basically write down the unwritten rules. And it serves as a great point where you can refer back to for people. Then have open lines of communication. People shouldn't be afraid to talk to you. It shouldn't be a process to reach you, because then people are just not going to want to speak to you because it takes so much time. And we found that it's absolutely crucial to have at least one person in your team called a culture champion. This person is tasked with ensuring team members still get exposed to your company or team culture, whether you're working from home or from an office. They know the unwritten rules in the company. They know who to speak to if you have any questions. And they can also be the instigators of your team socials. This ensures that your team doesn't feel isolated from the rest of the company and that socialization between your team members still gets the attention that it deserves. And most importantly, if not the most important thing ever, is you need to build trust between your team, you and the rest of your team members. Because no one wakes up thinking they're going to go to work and they're going to do a very bad job today. It's just silly. The environment your team works in should be adapted, therefore, so that they can focus on doing their jobs well and that they aren't being bogged down by processes, office politics, and red tape. Trust ensures that people try their very best not to disappoint you. I, for instance, know that if I disappoint someone that I know trusts me, I'm going to feel like shit. And that's also true for a lot of people that I've spoken to. We want to feel like people trust us to do our jobs, because otherwise, why are you paying us? So you don't need to constantly check up on people. Instead, set your clear expectations and have achievable goals and recognize those achievements when people achieve them. Encourage experimentation. If someone suggests an alternative like a new library for your state management or a different technology stack, don't just shoot it down. Spend time, discuss it, investigate the pros and cons, and try it out if you can't objectively prove that it's a bad idea. This is how most of our processes and meetings works. Our afternoon catch-ups, for instance, was an experiment at the very beginning, and it ended up working very well because we couldn't find a negative in it. And then regularly reflect on what works for your team and what does not work, and actively try to remove obstacles for each other. We, for instance, use our fortnightly retrospective meetings, not just to retrospect on our code and the different tasks that we achieved, but also on how meetings and different environmental factors affected us. And this results in a lot of improvements to the team or the cancellation of useless things. So, you have to be prepared. Your plan's not going to necessarily be followed. And then, if it doesn't work the way you think it was going to work, change it, rather than trying to force your plan. This whole system is about being flexible and being open. It's like gardening. You know, all your flowers don't need the same amount of water. Your different plants are going to respond differently to how much fertilizer you throw at them. And you just need to maintain the environment as best you can and trust your plants to do their thing. Now, that's my 2 cents on the matter. A little short talk. We can do some Q&A now. Just wait for the microphone there.
Hi, that was a great talk. I'm curious about the conflict resolution portion that you discussed. So what's your current process? Because it's a little bit something that I'm actually dealing with. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it in a team without having to escalate every time. You want to kind of deal with the person individually, but you do want to have results. And sometimes it just happens that there are no results. Yeah, so I'm just curious about the process that you currently follow.
All right. Very good question, very relevant. So what we tend to do is you get a feeling when you find out that someone is not performing well. And what we tend to do is we first bring it in our little catch-ups. We'll say, hey man, you're taking a bit long. Do you need help? Our first step is always to offer help to the person. It sometimes happens that someone doesn't want help or it doesn't do anything. Our BA and our QA people are, for instance, people who are very good with speaking to someone about difficult stuff. So what then usually happens is they schedule a little intervention meeting just to chat about things. And we try to keep it positive and open. We don't say, you're a bad person. We say, we see you're struggling with a certain topic. How can we make it better for you? Or do you know what is going wrong? That's our next step. If this then turns into a point where we can't get past this, we didn't originally start out with this team. We started with a team member who did not like this whole autonomous and remote setup. He wanted very rigid roles, and he actually wanted to split up things between team members and let people leave each other alone, which resulted in a lot of conflict between us and him. It just eventually came to the point where we were like, okay, we can agree that we're disagreeing at the moment. Things are not working. And then what we do is we rope in our leadership henny to come in and have a chat with the person. So we try to do it as much as possible by first offering help and then maybe having an intervention meeting. And then afterwards, if you agree that things are not working, then we still get the manager to step in.
Hi. How much do you think the way the client worked and what their culture was contributed to the team being able to work this way or form its way of working this way? And do you think it would have been significant had the client been different?
Very good question. So I do think how our client works with not just our team, but with our company had a very, very big effect on how we work. We have a lot of teams at our current client, and we've built this trust between us so that they trust us to do our job and they don't have to constantly supervise us. So they trust when they get a team, they know they're getting a good job. So the client we had was also very receptive to us doing things. And what we did is we constantly involved them by still telling them, hey, this is what we want to try and do. This is what we think. Let's give it 2 weeks or a month, because in corporates things take years. So we constantly brought them in and we asked them whether we could experiment. And I think that helped a lot. Our current product owner comes from a space. He was in media where things happened a lot very quickly. And he also gets frustrated with a bunch of processes. So he's very much for us trying to optimize those things. So if you have a client that is not receptive towards these things, it is going to be very difficult. But I do think if you involve them and you actually make them feel part of your team, they might eventually, get used to it and be more receptive. Right, do you have any more questions? Let's see what time it is. Let's see if there's a Slack question, since we have some 10 minutes. No? Okay. So the question is from Dion Hubert. He says, do you ever do any team building events completely online? Given our geographic distribution, meeting up for lunch is quite a challenge. So yes, we do. We have there's great online board gaming events. As part of our social stuff, we also have a little ritual every day where we finish our catch-ups with a joke, and then you nominate the next person for the next day. This serves as a great icebreaker as well. And then for our team lunches, we have a little agreement with our company where we'll fly everyone into one place about 4 or 5 times a year.
Hi, sorry, the mic was far away. First off, great talk, thank you very much. One of the things that you were speaking about, having a leader or somebody not senior in the space to allow other people the freedom of being able to contribute. Do you have any techniques for where, in very diverse teams, you might have very introverted and extroverted people. How do you enable, or how do you encourage that team to be able to provide a platform for those that may be too shy to contribute or feel like they are not senior enough to contribute? How do you encourage that so that you're not there, but you know that that's still happening and people feel still that they're like contributing?
All right. So what we found, first of all, it's much more difficult if you have a large team, because even if you're large, you're just going to get lost between the numbers. So we try to keep teams as small as possible, like between 5 to 10 people. So they already have people closer to each other, so you still see people in the room. Then, as I've mentioned, we have this little joke ritual, and what's nice is like we can all agree like jokes are sometimes funny, sometimes not. And this helps to get someone to know the team, where usually like if someone is very scared to talk, it's like they just don't know the team or they feel uncomfortable speaking. And by putting this little like thing that's really not that important on them, it makes them get used to speaking with everyone and voicing whatever they're thinking. Then when we get a team member on board, like when you join a new team or when you're just very shy of stuff, you don't know what to do or who to ask things. So what we typically do is we immediately give you something to do that is important in the task list. We don't give you just document this random API that no one really uses. We actually give you the very next task in our backlog, and we expect you to take long, and then someone will sit with you once in a while to just follow up and chat with you. So that's how we try to get people more involved. And we also understand if you don't want to get involved, that's perfectly fine with us. Hope that answers the question. Cool. Yes?
Me again. So your manager was less involved in the day-to-day, but you said he was still an observer. So I'm interested in how did your manager actually observe this? Were there still one-on-ones going on outside of a communal team context?
Okay, so when we started out our team, it was a bit because we were all new. He just brought us together, and when there's a new person joining the team, he will introduce them and check up. He is inside. We have a WhatsApp group where we do our team stuff. He is also in our Microsoft Team instance, so he sees all our communication. So he actively looks at those types of things. I know he has regular chats with our senior software engineer, regular being like every month or so, just to check in like what is going on, how's this person doing, those types of discussions. I've also had personally, one day be like, hey, how's this new guy doing on the team? Is he coping? Is he learning? Like that. And that is how he tends to, is a very much of a silent observer, but we do know that he's there, which is great. All right.
One last question. This may be a little unfair, but I'm just wondering, how do you deal with all the ceremonies, like all of the meetings that come up? So I'm part of a DevOps team, and part of that means that you have to attend to engineering requests and so on and so forth, and you can't just leave somebody out there to be blocked. So you tend to have a lot of people pinging you, you tend to have a lot of people wanting to have a slot with you. And if within your team, like for instance, the idea of having like 2 meetings a day, I think it's great. I just wonder how feasible that would be for a team like mine. I'm just wondering, how do you deal with like all of the incoming meetings and sort of balancing it with your team-related meetings? I don't know if that's...
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
Okay, perfect.
First question I always get asked is, how do you add 2 more meetings to someone's day every day? What we do, first of all, we found with these meetings, it actually resulted in the elimination of a lot of other meetings. Because there's a meeting that could have been an email. There's meetings that can be spread out over a few days. Like having your prioritization done in a few increments every day results in much better alignment with the priorities than doing it every 2 weeks or every month, because things change day to day. Then also with any meeting requests that we get in, what we do is we always forward them to the entire team. So anyone is able to pick up, and what we then usually do is, what sometimes happens is, like our junior, for instance, he wanted to get involved in our AWS architecture stuff. And we just said, like, okay, you're welcome, you can pick up these meetings. And then you started to delegate some tasks to people. So that's how we try to do this influx of stuff. And by also sending it to the entire team and letting people volunteer to take over for you, it does result in some knowledge sharing, some upskilling, and making sure that there's not one person where if they leave, the entire team falls apart. Yes, sir.
Hi, sorry. Now, the question that I'm wondering, because you've spoken a lot about the next item on the list, how are you deciding what items go on the list and who is kind of making that list of items and architecting the overall design? And how do you manage that within the team?
All right. So we have a Jira board with a bunch of huge epics, and then each epic is split up into smaller tasks. So our BA is very much in contact with our client the whole time, and what they will do is they will ask what is the next biggest goal, and they would reprioritize them in the backlog and those ones. And this reprioritization or maintenance of the backlog column, so to say, is done very regularly. We also we check that when we get to our retrospectives, if we found out that things just kept doing this, today it's this priority, tomorrow it's this priority, we actually mention this and we have the client in our retros so that we can all work together on making sure what we want to do aligns with what we need to do. If that, I don't know if that answers your question. Cool.
Hey, Andreas. So just a question about that then. This is kind of a Kanban approach. As the previous gentleman asked, who makes larger architecture decisions? Say, the client says, we are going to do a solar flow in our team. How do you go about architecting like a new feature, a completely new feature, which hasn't been done before?
So Zane's in my team, okay, just for context. So what we tend to do is we have these discussions with the client from the very beginning with the business side of things. So we as an engineering team don't actually come in when everything has been spec'd out and the designs have been done and now there needs to be code written. It was so at the very beginning, and we found out that by the time we need to write the code, there's a bunch of questions we ask, like because we know how the data flows, that points out flaws in designs and specs. And then it would be a whole process to start it again. So we ask that we get more involved from the beginning by just letting us know when things happen, saying this new epic is coming up, we might need someone to volunteer for these meetings. When we get to the point where we say, okay, yes, we're ready to start development on this new big architecture, solar, for instance, thing, there's usually a person that is volunteering for driving the whole feature, but the whole team together has a discussion about what we think we should do. It doesn't happen as regularly as we would like it to happen, and that is probably just because it depends on the person who drives the feature. So we try to get the team as involved as possible from the very beginning. We have a little discussion about the team, and then when we want to develop, we have to get a discussion between people about what do we actually do. And we make a very good point about not talking in very abstract points, not using all these fancy corporate words and jargon, and the TLAs, all those like a 3-letter acronyms, but being very specific about when this piece of data happens, what do we actually do? I hope that answers your question. Cool. Any more questions? All right, cool. Thank you, everyone. And please rate the talk. We can both win vacuums.